They thought missiles would silence them, that fear would finally make them fall. But what happened next made the whole world stop and stare. As fire rained from the sky, something rose from the ground that no weapon could destroy. Faith. This isn't just another story of war. This is a story of unshakable hearts, of people who stood tall when the world expected them to break. This is about Muslims who didn't flinch, who didn't run, who whispered Allahu Akbar while the earth trembled beneath them. You're not just here to listen. You're here to feel the power of a truth that can't be buried by bombs or silenced by fear. From the ashes, a message was born, a message the world can no longer ignore. And if you stay with me till the end, you'll understand exactly why. They couldn't break them because they were built by something eternal. When the missiles came down, they came to destroy more than buildings. They came to break willpower, to turn hearts into ash, and to silence the courage that has lived in Muslim lands for generations. It was never just about the physical damage. They aimed for the spirit, for the core, for the soul of a people whose resilience has always been misunderstood. The world thought that as the bombs fell, so would the people, that under the weight of destruction they would finally bow, finally scream for mercy, finally give up. But instead, the world witnessed something they didn't expect. Muslims standing firm, unshaken, unbroken, and unwavering. These weren't soldiers in armored suits. These were mothers shielding their children with nothing but a prayer. Fathers carrying the wounded with hands cracked by labor and grief. Young boys reciting verses from the Quran as the sky exploded above them. The streets weren't empty. They were filled with faith. Every explosion was answered by a whisper of Allahu Akbar. Every attack was met with a patience that no weapon could destroy. They stood not because they weren't afraid, but because their fear had been surrendered to something greater. Because when you believe your soul belongs to Allah, you fear nothing that man can do to your body. It's easy to talk about courage when you're safe behind walls, but true courage is when the walls are crumbling around you and you still find the strength to stand. When the missiles fell, Muslims didn't scatter in shame. They gathered in mosques, even half-destroyed ones. They didn't question their faith. They turned to it with more urgency than ever. They didn't ask, why us? They said, Ya Allah, grant us strength. This is what the world missed for so long, that this Ummah, this nation of believers, has a source of power that doesn't run on politics or weapons or money. It runs on conviction, on history, on a promise from their Lord that no struggle is wasted and no pain goes unseen. While some watch with pity, others with confusion, those who truly understood knew that this wasn't weakness on display. It was strength in its purest form. The strength to keep going when you've lost everything. The strength to still believe in justice when you've been denied it over and over again. The strength to say we belong to Allah and to Him we return, not with despair but with dignity. That night, as missiles fell from the skies, something else rose from the ground. Proof. Proof of what Muslims are truly made of. And it was a sight the world will not forget. The world watched through screens, seeing buildings crumble and streets coated in ash. But what they didn't see was what truly mattered. The invisible force that held people together in the face of catastrophe. The media showed us smoke, sirens, and shattered glass. But they didn't show us the unwavering eyes of the mother who lost everything and still whispered Alhamdulillah. They didn't zoom in on the father digging through rubble with bare hands while reciting verses of the Quran. They didn't capture the silent bravery of the child who stood outside a broken school, still holding a backpack, still believing in a future. They framed it as a tragedy, and it was. But it was more than that. It was also a testimony of strength, not born from weaponry, but from the soul. A testimony of people whose homes were crushed, but whose hearts refused to collapse. Muslims across the world saw through the headlines. They didn't just see victims. They saw reflections of themselves. They saw their own prayers, their own mothers, their own communities echoed in the streets of Gaza, the alleys of Lebanon, the courtyards of Yemen. And what the cameras failed to catch is that the rubble was not just rubble. It was sacred ground, ground soaked in patience and sacrifice, in faith. What they didn't record were the hands raised in dua amidst the debris. What they missed were the moments when people lined up to give charity, to give blood, to give whatever they had, even when they barely had anything left to give. That strength didn't make headlines, but it moved mountains in the hearts of those who understood. The media doesn't know how to report on resilience. It's not loud. It doesn't explode. It doesn't scream. It just endures, quietly, powerfully. And that's what they couldn't comprehend. They were expecting chaos, expecting collapse, but what they found was a people who stood tall under fire, a people who have been tested by centuries of oppression, colonization, betrayal, and yet never let go of their dignity. The world saw the smoke, but missed the soul. They saw damage, but missed the devotion. They saw destruction, but missed the defiance in the eyes of those who said, "We are still here." Muslims didn't need the world's sympathy. They didn't ask for pity. What they showed was something far greater. They showed that even when the world forgets your humanity, you don't have to. You can still walk through the ashes with your head held high, knowing who you are, knowing who you belong to. That's what the media missed. But that's what the world is slowly beginning to see. While the world calculated power in bombs and bullets, Muslims across the globe were counting on something far greater: faith. Not the kind that wavers when the skies turn black, but the kind that grows deeper in darkness. The kind that doesn't disappear when tested, but instead shines even brighter. As missiles thundered down and the ground trembled under innocent feet, Muslims didn't run toward panic. They turned to prayer. They didn't reach for revenge. They reached for patience. Because when you trust in Allah, truly trust Him, there's a calm that no enemy can shake and a resolve no force can destroy. This wasn't weakness. This was strength in its most raw and sacred form. The kind of strength that isn't born in comfort, but in struggle. Muslims stood unarmed, many with nothing more than the clothes on their backs, yet their hearts were fortified by something the enemy couldn't touch. Tawakkul, complete reliance on the one who sees all, knows all, and controls all. They understood something the world still struggles to grasp, that true power comes not from what you hold in your hands, but from what you carry in your soul. And when that soul is anchored in faith, no missile can truly land where it matters most. The world expected to see fear, but they witnessed a strange kind of peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing this life is temporary. The kind that understands pain in this world is not punishment, but purification. That death is not defeat, but a return to the most merciful. So, even when homes crumbled and lives were lost, you saw men raise their hands and say, "Wah ha ha Allah. Allah is sufficient for us." and he is the best disposer of affairs. And they meant it. They meant it when they buried their children. They meant it when they stood on broken streets and prayed Fajr. They meant it when they whispered Bismillah before lifting a fallen stone or carrying a wounded soul. That trust, that faith, is what the enemy never prepared for, because it can't be bombed, hacked, or invaded. It lives in the unseen, and it moves people to rise when the world expects them to fall. Muslims have always carried this force, from the earliest battles of Islam to the modern battlefields of today. It is a trust that fuels resistance without hate, a patience that absorbs pain without surrender. While their enemies came with fear, they met them with faith. And that faith is what shook the world. Because when a believer stands before death with contentment in their chest and the name of Allah on their lips, it's not the believer who is weak. It's the world that doesn't understand what strength truly looks like. They tried to write Muslims out of history, to erase their victories, bury their brilliance, and silence their legacy. From the fall of Andalusia to the burning of Baghdad, from the colonization of Muslim lands to the redrawing of borders by foreign hands, every chapter of pain was meant to end in disappearance. But instead of fading into silence, Muslims kept writing. They wrote with their endurance, with their resistance, with their belief that history does not belong to the one who shouts the loudest, but to the one who remains standing when the dust settles. Empires rose and fell trying to wipe Islam off the map, yet the call to prayer still echoes 5 times a day in every corner of the globe. They tried to erase the people of faith, but the ink of Islam is not written with approval from the world. It is written with conviction from the sun. Every attempt to crush this ummah only reminded it of its origin, that it came from a desert where the prophet stood alone with a message, and within a generation, that message reached the palaces of Rome and Persia, that its strength doesn't lie in numbers or riches, but in submission to the one who never dies. The trials weren't new. Muslims have always faced storms, betrayal, and slander, but through it all, they've held tight to the rope of Allah. And because of that, they've kept building even in ruins, kept rising even from ashes. Every martyr became a milestone, every orphan a witness, every mother who buried her child with tears and sabr became part of a lineage not defined by pain, but by purpose. This history isn't one of defeat, it's one of unmatched perseverance. While others tried to define Muslims through conflict, the Muslims redefined themselves through worship, through unity, through unrelenting hope. The stories of Muslim resilience were never meant to be told by the world, they were meant to be felt by the believers. And now, the world is starting to feel them too. This generation carries the echo of every prayer made in secret, every sacrifice made in silence, every truth spoken in chains. They were never erased. They were engraved in hearts, in soil, in scripture. And now that courage, forged by centuries of trial, is rising again, not as a memory, but as a movement. The message is clear. You can't erase a people whose foundation is faith. You can't silence a voice that speaks from the soul. And you can't break a nation that knows it was built not on fear, but on the promise that Allah is with the patient. The world turned its eyes to the Muslim lands, expecting to see fear, expecting to see weakness, expecting to see a people finally brought to their knees. As the bombs dropped and the threats mounted, they watched closely, ready to declare victory not just over borders, but over belief itself. But what they witnessed instead was something that stopped them in their tracks. Because when the smoke began to rise, so did something else. dignity, and not the kind of dignity that is taught in textbooks or given in parliaments, but the kind that lives in the heart of a people who know exactly who they are and exactly who they belong to. From the streets of Gaza to the rooftops of Sana'a, from the mountains of Lebanon to the towns of Iran, a different kind of unity began to rise. It wasn't political. It wasn't staged. It was real, it was raw, and it was powerful. Muslims who had been divided by borders and languages suddenly remembered that their bond was never geographical, it was spiritual. That the blood of one Muslim mattered to another, no matter how far. That the pain of one family echoed across oceans. That the cry of a mother in Palestine reached the heart of a youth in Malaysia, in Nigeria, in London, in Jakarta. The world expected chaos, but what they saw was purpose. The enemy expected Muslims to turn on each other, to blame, to fragment, but instead there were marches, there were du'as, there were voices rising across every continent saying, "We see you, we hear you, we are with you." That is the power of this ummah. It does not need to be loud to be strong. It does not need to rule to be united. Its strength comes from the connection that lives beyond this world, a connection that says we are one body, and when one part is in pain, the whole body aches. What shook the world wasn't just that Muslims endured, it was that they endured together. Even when leaders were silent, the people were not. Even when media distorted the truth, the hearts of the believers carried it clear. That collective strength, that unity born of faith, is something no weapon can break and no propaganda can erase. Because it is not man-made, it is divinely rooted. And in those moments of destruction, what rose from the rubble was not just resistance, it was a reminder that Islam is not a religion of despair, it is a religion of hope, of justice, of unwavering solidarity. So when the world looked for weakness, they witnessed something holy, something ancient, something unshakable. They saw Muslims standing shoulder to shoulder, even from miles apart, bound not by strategy, but by sincerity. And that image, that echo of unity under fire will remain, because it was never just about survival. It was about standing for something eternal, together. This wasn't just another chapter in the story of war. It was a statement written in blood and belief. As missiles tore through the night skies and explosions lit up the darkness, the world held its breath, expecting surrender, expecting silence, but instead what emerged was a voice. Not a scream, not a cry, but a declaration. A calm, clear message that echoed louder than any blast. We are still here. We are not broken, and we will not be erased. Because this was never just about land or politics or power. This was about identity, about the unwavering truth of what it means to be Muslim, even when the world tries to define you by pain. The resilience that unfolded wasn't temporary. It wasn't a flash of defiance. It was a legacy unfolding in real time. From every cracked wall where children scribbled Quranic verses, to every martyr's grave wrapped in a simple white cloth, to every whisper of La ilaha illallah in a moment of fear, the world saw that this wasn't just survival, it was faith in motion. The missiles came to destroy, but they only peeled back the layers of something deeper, conviction. Conviction that no matter how dark it gets, light belongs to those who remember Allah. Conviction that justice may be delayed, but it is never denied by the one who sees all. Conviction that even in loss there is victory when your soul remains intact. This moment wasn't about retaliation. It was about revelation, a revelation to the world that Muslims are not defined by the chaos around them, but by the calm within them. That Islam is not just a belief system, it's a way of standing, a way of breathing through pressure, of walking through storms with your head high and your heart surrendered only to the Creator. And when you walk like that, the world can't help but notice. The world expected ashes. Instead, it got awakening. An awakening that Muslims are not the broken shadows of a once great civilization. They are the living pulse of something timeless, something rooted in divine truth. This wasn't just a test of endurance. It was a moment of exposure. It exposed the cruelty of those who bomb, but also the beauty of those who believe. It showed the world that to be Muslim is to carry centuries of trial and still smile with faith, to face injustice with sabrah, to answer hate with strength, and to know that even if the world turns its back, Allah never does. And so this moment became a message not written in ink, but in tears, prayers, and resistance. That Muslims may bleed, but they rise. They may cry, but they praise. They may fall, but they never fall apart. And that is what shook the world, not the missiles, but the meaning behind the people who stood unshaken beneath them. They came with force, with fire, with every tool meant to destroy. They rained missiles from the sky thinking they'd break a people. But instead, they exposed a truth the world had long ignored. What stood beneath those bombs wasn't weakness, it was will. What rose from the ashes wasn't defeat, it was dignity. And what echoed louder than the explosions was the unbreakable soul of a believer. The world saw Muslims not just as survivors, but as a people built by faith, anchored in patience and fearless in the face of death. They didn't fall. They rose. They didn't crumble. They connected. They didn't retreat. They remembered who they belonged to. So now the world knows. Muslims aren't defined by the destruction around them. They are defined by the power within them. Power rooted not in rage, but in tawakkul. Not in revenge, but in resilience. Not in noise, but in noble silence. You tried to break them, but instead, you revealed what they're truly made of. To every listener, every soul that felt these words in your chest, thank you. May your heart remain strong, your faith